Welcome, welcome. Hello, everyone. This is your favorite PD webinar host of all time, Devanshi Mathur. Welcome to another exciting session of EduSmart's Professional Development Series. Today, we have an amazing presenter ready to share with you her endless excitement about inquiry-based learning and how you can use it to bridge gaps. Leah is a graduate of the NASA Endeavor STEM certification program with a master's degree in science education and STEM certification from Columbia University. She has a passion for all things STEM and has a devoted career to creating STEM opportunities for underserved communities in science. She has a jam-packed session for you today. So without further ado, please give your warmest welcome to the one, the only Leah Pinto.
Thank you. You make me sound so much cooler than I really am. So I really love that. Got a nice little boost to get going. Yes, from our favorite host of all time, obviously. Now you can see why. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I am very, very passionate about inquiry-based learning, and I love talking about this topic. So we have a lot to share with you about how inquiry-based learning can help our students catch up in science. And boy, do we know how much they need to catch up. There are some real gaps out there from the chaos of the last few years with COVID and everything going on. But these gaps existed before as well. And there's a lot of reasons for those. So we're going to look at how inquiry-based learning can help you in your classroom. To do that, we really need to figure out what is inquiry-based learning? What is the definition of inquiry-based learning? And that's not as easy as it seems. It's not a lot of consensus around what is inquiry-based learning. So in order to really get us started on this, I would love if you would join us on our Jamboard. We're going to actually incorporate some of the tenets of inquiry-based learning by doing a KWL chart as we go. And on our Jamboard, if you would please fill out the K portion of the KWL chart. So what do I know already coming in about inquiry-based learning? And if you're not familiar with Jamboard, all you need to do is go to the left-hand side. You'll find a little sticky note. You can make it pretty, whatever color you like. Be sure to add your name and then just tell us what you already know about inquiry-based learning. There's a lot of opinions. It's been around a while. But do we really understand what this process, this student-led method of learning is? So I would love to have any input, any of your thoughts, starting out with, what do I already know? That way we can kind of build our discussion today based on our level of understanding. So the link to the Jamboard is in the chat, and you can just click on that link and it will take you straight to here. This is our know portion. We will come back to this throughout the video or throughout our presentation today. So as you get a chance, just go on in and let's see what we know about inquiry-based learning. There are a few common threads among all of the different definitions and variations of inquiry-based learning, and that is that it is always a student-led method of learning. We are acting as facilitators, not as lecturers in this way of learning. It focuses on real-life questions for the students, and the key to really expanding our students' understanding and filling in those gaps is getting them authentically curious and excited about science. And that's where this real life portion comes in. We connect the content to our students' real life, and they actually are engaged at a much deeper level. And we keep all of the problems or challenges relevant and interesting to the students. So we know that these three pieces are in every definition of inquiry-based learning. And from there, there's a lot of discussion about what inquiry should look like. It is a hands-on and minds-on method of learning. Now, that doesn't mean every single time is going to be a big lab where the students are, playing with chemicals or doing dissections, but it needs to be very concrete for the students. And the roles are kind of shifted a little bit. The teacher here is acting as facilitator. Your job is not to, provide lecture notes, have the students taking notes, and then questioning them. It's to provide them with the opportunity to investigate. And you create that opportunity for them, giving them appropriate support based on their grade level and what needs we have for learning. We know as teachers, we are responsible for teaching a certain amount of content. And it's scary for the teacher to turn over learning to the students. Like, I'm going to be evaluated on whether my students know the content, and now you want me to give them this role. So it's kind of a challenge for teachers to be able to hand over that learning to the students. Your best friend throughout the process is going to be asking questions. And this is how we get our students to know what we need them to know as far as content, because we probe and guide them in the right direction. The students, on the other hand, start with the questions. They're the ones who are asking questions and making observations. This is a very collaborative process for the students. We want them working with each other and searching for solutions and creating that data and collecting data and analyzing it and testing their own solutions. And a super important part, one of the key parts, is they review and share their outcomes. The share piece is critical. Inquiry-based learning is it's doing science the way science is really done in the real world. So we're simulating this process of doing real science, and the students respond to that. But there's different levels of inquiry. What we really want to get away from is this total guidance or verification piece. We don't want to be doing cookie cutter labs where the teacher is giving the students the notes and then probing them on it and that drill and skill, and they're just following our directions step by step by step, and we tell them what to see. That isn't good science. But there's a lot of research that shows we don't want to also do this open inquiry where we just hand the whole process over to the kids. That's too much on the students. It's too much on the teachers. In an open inquiry model, a true open inquiry, the students are generating their own questions. What do I want to research? What do I want to look at? What do I want to know? Well, we have content we have to teach. We're responsible for our standards. So we really want to focus our students on those standards. This is your sweet spot. Minimum guidance in a guided or structured inquiry process. And that's really where we're going to focus today. The level of structure is really going to depend on the age of the students, your grade level, and the capability of the students. Some students are in districts where they've been doing this a long time and it's been scaffolded up and taught to them over time, and that's great. But a lot of our students don't have that experience with it. And so they may require extra scaffolding, extra structure as they begin the process of inquiry. As well as talking about inquiry, we want to look at the gaps that we know are current and existing in education right now, specifically in science education. And of course, a lot of these gaps were caused by these 3 years of chaos in COVID. But that's not the only reason that they're there. Lack of technology, or more specifically, lack of equitable distribution of technology, is a key issue in how our science instruction is perhaps lacking. I taught for over 10 years in a Title I district, and we're very, very rural. We were so rural that when we shut down for COVID, even though we had companies like Verizon coming in and offering hotspots and trying to fill in this gap in technology, our students couldn't connect to the internet. This is also true, this lack of technology in lower income or maybe inner city schools, where they just don't have the same access to technology. A significant factor in the gaps right now is going to be this issue of trained teachers. Our teachers, a lot, are leaving the field in numbers that we've never seen before. We're having new teachers come in who are not necessarily comfortable with inquiry. Teachers who have never taught before or have never taught science before. And oftentimes this is a matter of equity as well, because teachers will start in lower income or challenging schools, and then once they gain experience, they move to other districts. So rural schools and low economically disadvantaged communities often have more new teachers and less experienced teachers. Lack of experience, we can really see where our students are lacking concrete experiences because of COVID. We as schools have been really great about creating concrete experiences for our students with things like field trips to the zoo and being able to take our kids to see things that they may not experience otherwise. But these things have been shut down for years. Some students, especially in the larger cities, everything's been closed for 2 years and they just don't have concrete experience. They haven't been able to go on the field trips to the farm or the zoo or the museum. Those opportunities haven't been there. So that is really a direct result of 3 years of shutdown. The key here of lack of role models, again, specifically for low-income students or rural students, when someone graduates and they go to college and they get a STEM degree, they oftentimes move to where the jobs are. And so we don't necessarily have authentic role models in the communities where students aren't seeing science as an everyday kind of thing. And that can create a gap for the students. They see the relevance of math and reading, but they may not see the relevance of science. And finally, just this lack of opportunity. And for me, that means, like, we know in the lower grades, it is tough to get time in your schedule to teach science. Our kids are coming to us not able to read even at the higher level or higher grade levels. And you have to address those problems first. They have to be able to read in order to grab science. The schedule, the emphasis we're placing on reading, writing, and math doesn't allow a lot of room for science. And so sometimes 5th grade is the first time they get really solid science instruction. And all of these together are really creating a lot of gaps in our students' science knowledge. And we're seeing students who just don't understand the basics. So with all of that said, all of these gaps that we have to explore, how then can inquiry-based learning help us bridge these gaps? And I want to go back to our Jamboard real quick. And Devontae, if you would, please go ahead and put that link to the Jamboard in the chat again, so we can kind of see what we know about inquiry-based learning as we're going in, and maybe even moving on to this, what do I want to know about inquiry-based learning? Like, how does this work? How can we help our students get through these gaps that we know exist? So I love some of these shared answers. Yes, it is very student-centered and shared experiences. The student is leading the process of what they want to know. And key here, this is a great response, constructing their own understanding. We're not giving them the understanding. They need to construct it themselves. Go back to my slide here. So yeah, how can we help them to create their own understanding? And luckily there is a prescribed process for this inquiry. And we want to know how it can help. Well, it leads to a higher level of engagement. When our students are authentically curious and authentically engaged, they're going to learn at a faster rate than if we're just spoon feeding them information that they can't relate to and don't care about. That level of engagement is what makes up for their lack of education on the subject. That curiosity, when they're curious about something, they're going to start leading to questions about it. And we know questioning is a tough skill for some of our kids. They've lost the ability to ask questions because we just give them the information. Next, once we have them engaged in that level of curiosity, we know that it's student-led. And they're talking about things, they're looking at it from their own perspective and their relevance level. And again, that leads to that higher engagement. And then they start talking about it. So they want to know more, and they'll ask each other and they'll talk about it, and they're talking about their life. And when they are authentically engaged in their own life problems and things that are relevant to them in that way, something they have hands-on and concrete in front of them, those discussions get deeper. And then they want to know more. So it's set in the context of their everyday life, and they want to find out. Now we've got this passion for learning that's building within our students. It's not just, again, feeding them that information and hoping that they care enough just to pass, that they're going to absorb it. They're doing it because they want to do it. They want to know and they want to learn. And that will change their whole context of how they're doing science. And all of this put together really leads to the ability to think critically. And all of those gaps that our students have can be summed up with, they've lost these critical thinking skills that are so necessary to being able to explore the world around them and make sense of science. And inquiry-based learning is experiential. So we just said they don't have these experiences to scaffold onto. And we're creating the experience in class together when we're doing inquiry. And once it's concrete, then they can make that scaffold to a more abstract concept. So they start investigating, they start working through a problem, and it really leads to those higher level critical thinking skills that are going to help them overcome any gaps in their learning. And then it builds on itself. It's a cycle. That critical thinking leads them to more questions, and then they want to know more, and then they're again engaging that passion. So it's a cycle of learning by using these concrete inquiry-based methods. And all of that sounds great. Yay, let's do it. But how? How do you fit in time? How do I get inquiry into my classroom when I have so many standards to teach and I can barely get time to do it as it is? Again, we're talking about the guided inquiry model, so it doesn't have to be a huge shift in what you're already doing. It's a matter of how are you presenting the information. And inquiry needs to start with a question. So I taught 7th grade. My 7th graders would learn about the human body, and they'd know all about cellular, about the respiratory system and the circulatory system. But when we started on our unit with energy, I'd sit down at the front of the class and ask them, why are you breathing? And they're like, to stay alive. Like, duh, Miss Pinto. Of course they're breathing to stay alive, but why? Well, because I want to live. Or then they start going, because my lungs need oxygen. Like, really? Your lungs are what need oxygen? And I just, you'd see the students start to wonder and start to go, because your lungs don't need oxygen. They're not what's staying alive. Well, then it goes into your bloodstream. And then they keep asking. And the funniest part was they would suddenly start to like not breathe. And you could see them going and like trying to catch like, why am I doing this? And we would lead that little bit by little bit into exploring cellular respiration and the process of photosynthesis, where we're actually talking oxygen and carbon dioxide and that transformation. But you have to get them wondering. I would start my class with a question that made them just think. Like, I've never looked at it like that before. So these questions need to come from you ahead of time. Like, prepare your questions in advance. It's very difficult to come up with a really great question on the fly. What I would actually do is have a little notebook that I have question stems on, and I would plant those question stems ahead of time. As I'm planning my lesson, I'm going to start going through and thinking, how can I prompt my kids to get where I need them to be? How can I really get them on the right track? What question is going to make them think deeper at this moment? And I would write them down and have them in my back pocket so that I'm not trying to come up with that stuff on the fly, because I got way too much to deal with in this classroom. So plan your questions ahead of time. Why do boats float? They're really heavy. Have you ever seen a boat? They're big. How does that float? Probably not something that they've really come across. They're familiar with the concept, but have they ever really thought about it? What causes a flood? How do we have a flood? How do you grow up? How do you change from a baby to an adult? Get them thinking in those ways. And this is guided inquiry because you as the teacher are prompting the question. Open inquiry would be more like a passion project or a genius hour where the student gets to generate their own question. But when we're teaching standards, when we know that we have these standards that we have to reach, we really want to guide them in what direction we need them to go. So you start with your question, which is a great way to do with the KWL chart. Already have that going on the Jamboard. And so if you haven't joined the Jamboard yet, we would love to have your participation there. The K is, what do I already know? So we're going to build connections to what the students already have in their head. And then we go into, what do I want to know? Let's start asking some questions. What questions do we want to know about this topic? And this is a tough one for a lot of students. We really, in a lot of ways, have reduced their ability to question and be curious. And it's tough for them to get this piece. So this may require some real digging in of you as the teacher trying to facilitate that. How do they ask questions? One key to this is don't have them talking to you. They should be talking to each other, because when they're trying to generate questions for you, it's going to change the way they're perceiving it. But if they're just having a discussion and they're talking it through, they're going to have a better time asking questions of each other and building on each other's questions. So this is a very collaborative piece. And then we come back at the end with, what have I learned about this? And that's part of that presentation piece that we'll get to in a moment. So again, we start with a question, and then we investigate this question. This may be research, it may be labs, it may be worksheets, it may be videos, whatever facilitates their learning best. And that's where you're stepping back, you're giving them what they need, and then you're guiding them through questioning. We're not lecturing, we're not giving notes, we're just letting them explore. And this is the tough thing for teachers as well. These questions are going to really help you. What does this tell you about, or what do you think the effects are? This is where you plant your questions in advance. Students should be working with collaborative partners. They don't learn well by themselves when they're really having to investigate. Let them have that partner to talk about, or a group to work through the issues with. And this is a really great place for your role models and subject matter experts. Bringing people into your class who are experts at this material will engage your students at a whole different level. And there's tons of ways that you can get these people in your class. Looking around, if you're not familiar with the Civil Air Patrol education program, it is an amazing resource. I had, as part of the Civil Air Patrol, I had a fighter pilot, a helicopter pilot, and an airplane mechanic come into my classroom and make paper airplanes with my students. And they loved it. There was so many amazing questions that I would never have even thought of, because they had these authentic, real life people talking to them about everything to do with aviation. You can form partners with nearby schools. There was a college chemistry professor who we would rely on, and she would come in and work with our students as they were going through certain labs and certain materials. You can use, NASA has excellent resources to Zoom with the scientist, or find someone in your community who's willing to work with your students. If you're talking about human body, or you're talking about something to do with adaptations and things for animals, having a veterinarian come in and actually talk with your students, or having a nurse or a doctor come in and have that resource with your students, and they can just be going around having a conversation. They're going to ask questions of them that they would never ask of you. So it's really important to bring in subject matter experts and get them involved in your learning. And there's resources out there. There's a ton of different resources out there. So bringing in that collaborative piece with both students and other experts is really important. Once you've done the research and they're investigating, they're figuring things out, we want to then begin to test those solutions. Find lots of different ways of solving the issue, or of creating a solution. Have them discuss this with each other. We want to stay focused on solutions, but the way they can do that, when they're talking, when they're working together, the students will be like, oh my gosh, did you guys try this? Oh, that didn't work. Let's try it this way. Did you think of this? And they'll really get that interaction in there. So they work on their solutions. They work to design the solutions. And then the key here is to share those solutions. This is where you as a teacher are going to figure out, did they learn the content? So we want some kind of project or presentation. And this does not have to be something big and grand every single time. It can be a quick slide deck. It can be a written summary. You can have lots of different ways of doing it, of creating that project. It can be a poster that represents it. But you need them sharing their learning with others, because when they create a project with it, it's going to summarize what they know and solidify their content. But it also allows you to see what they know. So maybe my students did a really great job investigating, but they didn't quite get to exactly what I needed them to know based on the standards. After they've had all this experience, I can now at this point do a quick 10-minute lecture or a quick 10-minute intervention with them and make sure that they got the standard to the level that I need them to. So after they've done the inquiry, then you do the direct teach. And that way they have all the information, they have the experience. You can scaffold off of what you've done in class to really get them to the level that you need. But this is how you know. And this is the last part of the KWL chart. This is what I learned. And that way the students are sharing that piece with you. Other ways that we know are important to engage our students or help our students with this whole process of inquiry is to start with a low floor and a high ceiling. And what I mean by that in this case is some of our students are going to be very resistant to inquiry. And oftentimes it's your highest performing students who really don't like this at all, because they can do like science the way we've been doing it really well. They know the system. They know all they have to do is learn whatever you give them and they're done, they're good. And so when you hand it back over to them and you're like, no, I want you just to investigate, they're like, no, just tell me what I need to know. They don't really like that approach necessarily. Sometimes they love it. Sometimes they have a little resistance. But every student should be able to engage with inquiry. So that may mean you do additional scaffolding for particular students. It may mean at the lower grade levels, you really start small and they just take ownership of a small piece of the learning. And we're going to give you some really great examples of these in a few minutes. You're going to get all kinds of freebies today with different inquiry-based lesson plans. So we'll show you examples of what this looks like in just a little bit. So yeah, that low floor, you want to make sure your students are as supported as needed. For some groups, that may mean you give them additional information, additional resources, provide some kind of additional help for them. Or if they are able and willing and they're going to go for it, let them go for it. Let them have that freedom to really explore, as long as they're staying focused on the content you need them to learn. Again, these role models and local partnerships are so important. They just bring the whole process up to a new level. And the last one, our students have lost a lot of grit over the last couple of years. They give up very, very quickly, oftentimes. That just digging in and getting it done no matter what is oftentimes really difficult for them. So you may need to start small and start slow and build in that capacity over time. A lot of our kids don't like not knowing, and they don't like being wrong. And they feel like if they're doing it themselves, they could be wrong. So we just really like to make sure that they're supported as they do that, and then understand that they may feel challenged with all of that. But before we go to our example lessons that you will be receiving a copy of today after this, I want to check in one more time with our KWL chart. Go back to that. And let's look at this piece of what do I want to know? Yeah, just how to implement. It's tough. Exactly, when it's so little time, especially at the elementary level, and it's so little time is devoted to science, and we're just trying to get it figured out within our resources within our reading time and math time. Those are excellent questions about how we do inquiry-based learning. And I'm gonna show you a couple of examples of these different lessons and what they might look like at the elementary level in both 1st and 4th grade, and then in an 8th grade version as well. So you can kind of see how this should look in your classroom at these different levels. And we are going to be giving you these lessons today. These are all from the EduSmart platform. This is our hands-on piece. And so we just found some of our inquiry lessons. We have inquiry-based lessons for just about every TEK that we have. And you're also going to get this reference guide so you can see the lessons that I'm presenting and that we're sharing with you. You can see what they'll look like for the TEKs as far as Texas, Florida, and the NGSS content. So wherever you're at, you can be able to use these lessons within your classroom. So let's take a look at some of these inquiry lessons and look at how we can actually implement them. Starting with 1st grade. This is sorting and changing matter TEK, and we're looking at the difference between a more open inquiry and guided inquiry. And now, when I say open inquiry, it's not just the let them go and ask their own questions. It's just a little more student-led version. So in this case, we're talking about sorting objects. And in the lesson, what the students would do is you as a teacher would provide them a variety of natural objects, rocks and leaves and flowers or whatever you want to include. And then you are giving them the freedom to just explore them and sort them based on their own criteria. Don't tell them how to sort them. Don't tell them sort by size or color or living or non-living, but those are all questions that you can ask, those probing questions that help them understand how they might choose to sort the objects. But you're just letting them sort them on whatever criteria they want, and then they have to explain how they sorted them and why they chose that classification. So they really have to justify their answers. As far as more of a guided inquiry version, we have a lesson here on disappearing water. And in this version, it still has everything you need as far as background information and all of that. You're going to give them a piece of construction paper and some water and have them draw on the construction paper. And then once it's dried and the water's disappeared, we lead that discussion of what happened to the water? Where did it go? And have them explain and figure out with each other what happened in the water vapor, what happened to the water. So the difference here is that in the guided inquiry method, you're really giving them both the process and then helping them to walk through explaining it. Whereas open inquiry, they have to choose their criteria. So that's on a 1st grade level. We're looking at a 4th grade investigation here. This is testing the effects of force on an object. And this is more of an open inquiry lesson. In this case, the students are going to design their own test to figure out how this should work. So you're designing a descriptive investigation. All you as the teacher are doing is providing them a whole lot of materials to work with and then probing questions as you go through. And you'll notice on all of our activities, you're going to have all the information you need. This is the student version here, and then this is the teacher version that's going to give you full directions. It's going to give you suggested equipment, and then how we might have our students analyzing and reflecting. So everything is provided here for you for this open inquiry, and this would be open because they are designing their own investigation. You're just going to hand them a bunch of supplies and say, how can I test this? And let them design their own tests. For a more guided example of inquiry for 4th grade, this is reflecting light. And in this activity, the students are given a few materials, a mirror, a flashlight, some aluminum foil, and then a camera or computer if they have it. And their job is to shine the light on a specific spot, work through these questions. It's guided inquiry, because they already following a procedure, but they have to figure out how to do it themselves. So there's a lot more scaffold here, a lot more support, but they're still working through the process on their own. And that's kind of the difference between the open and guided in this case. Again, here's your teacher description. It has all the background information you need, all your materials, full procedures, and everything that you could need to actually implement this very smoothly in your classroom. For another example, we have 2 8th grade investigations. They both are covering the law of conservation of mass. The open-ended inquiry or open inquiry model, they are going to design and implement an experimental investigation that demonstrates the law of conservation of mass. So they are coming up with, again, their own experimental design. And you as the teacher version is here, it's going to tell you exactly what you need to know for background, instructions, have all of the materials that you might need, and safety information, and here's a rubric to guide that. So because they're designing their own investigation just using the materials that you provide them, then it's a more open inquiry model. Whereas testing the same standard with a more guided inquiry model, in this case, the students are going to use still wool and like an Erlenmeyer flask, and they're going to burn and measure whether anything was, like, they close the Erlenmeyer flask and create that closed environment, and then they're measuring was there a change after the still wool burns. So again, it has all the materials you need, it has everything that the student and teacher would need to implement this, and you are receiving copies of all of these investigations today. So you'll have 6 different inquiry lessons in your pocket based on from the EduSmart platform. So finally, as we wrap this up, because we're getting close to our time, hopefully we kind of covered everything that we already knew and what we want to know. And if you would, you can go back into our KWL chart now and say, what did you learn? And I understand as teachers, we don't necessarily need to finish this piece, but as a student, I would require my kids to go in and do this, because I can then use that data and determine what did they learn and what pieces do I need to fill in. So overall, just, inquiry is a really, really powerful tool that creates a higher level of engagement for our students. And I think that's really the key takeaway is, even in a super busy schedule, it's a shift in how your students are learning, as opposed to you giving them the information or them constructing their own information. And it doesn't have to be a horrible, lengthy process. It's a matter of, instead of lecturing, questioning and allowing them to have that lead in the process. We want to create those experiences for them and just really up the engagement. And that's how we're going to help make sure that your students are learning and closing those gaps. So again, here's, you'll receive a copy of the slide deck along with all those resources that we have given you. And are there any questions that anyone has? We still have plenty of time for questions if there's anything you want to know about inquiry.
We're there for you. But before we get into questions, I wanted to, on behalf of everyone here and on behalf of EduSmart, thank you so much, Leah, for taking the time and putting together all of this information in a concise, organized, and engaging fashion. And for all of those free resources, like she said, those free resources links are in your chat, and you will also be getting them via email next week. So thank you so much, Leah. That was 10 out of 10.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Absolutely. We do have about 5 more minutes for a Q&A, so please leave your questions in the chat and I will read them out loud. But just letting you know, Leah, we have plenty of people who are saying thank you for the resources and the excellent presentation.
Awesome.
So we have about our first question that came in was anonymous. They would like to ask you, with their school focusing so heavily on testing,
Yes.
how do these strategies prepare students for assessments?
If your students are learning at a higher level, it's going to translate into them understanding the content at a different level. The whole idea is the students have to really be able to apply the information. That's where our goal should be. It's not just memorization, not just being able to sprout it back, but they have to apply it. And so when the students are really discussing and they're using their critical thinking skills, that's what translates to being able to apply it to whatever question they find on the test. And so I think it is a very clear correlation between being able to understand what the test is asking and getting those higher level responses, especially with the new STAR 2.0 coming this year. It's not just going to be multiple choice. They're going to have to explain and justify their thinking with the short constructed responses. And so this is a really great piece to be able to up their what they're retaining and what they're able to tell you back, which is going to be that short constructed response.
Thank you. Our next question is, are these inquiries on the EduSmart program?
Yes, all 6 of the lessons that we are providing for you are they just came straight out of our platform. We do have, and there's so many more out there that I could have chosen. At every grade level and every TEK, we have hands-on inquiry-based activities. So on the platform from grades K through 2, you'll find the activities on our teacher resource documents. And then from 3 through biology, you'll find them listed as a separate piece of content called activity. And we have activities like this for every single standard in Texas, in Florida, and throughout our NGSS product. So lots and lots of resources for inquiry within EduSmart.
And for our last question of, oh wow, he said, thank you. I've already directed our teachers to use them. Love it. How, that's immediate. Look at you go. For our last question of this session, and this was put in quite early in your presentation, so you might have already touched on this, but how do you scaffold these tools you've shared for your students?
It's a matter of what resources do you provide. So if I'm doing this in a classroom, well, from my 7th graders, for example, and I have so many different levels of ability and interest within that one class, I'm going to provide some students with additional resources or different resources for that investigation piece. So one student I may guide to a specific website, for example, if we're doing some research, or a specific article. I may even have highlighted specific passages within a reading passage or whatever I'm using for my resources. So I'm going to give them, I'm not going to let them just sit out there and search. Whereas other students, I may just say, I don't know, go find the answers, because they can handle that student led. They want to go out and be curious and investigate on their own. And I think that applies based on grade level as well. For our kindergarten and 1st graders, we're going to keep we want them exploring on their own within a very contained square, right? So you're giving them a lot of resources, and based on those resources and based on how much you give them is what they're going to be able to do. So for example, in the sorting activity that we showed you, some groups I might give 10 objects, and some other groups or areas I may only give 2 or 3 and let them use their criteria that way. So it's your questioning, your level of support with your questions, and your resources that allow for differentiation and really scaffolding within the students' ability levels and time. But the whole point of inquiry is to build those concrete connections. And once you have a concrete connection, you can scaffold your content onto what you've done together as a group. And that helps the students really be able to grasp the material.
Thank you so much, Leah. Well, that puts us at our time. Thank you so much, Leah, for speaking with us today. And thank you, teachers and educators, for joining us here today. I know that you have a busy, busy time. And the fact that you took out time from your evening when you could have been watching TV, you came here to join us. I'm taking that as the biggest compliment. I'm saying you came here for me also. So thank you so much.
Obviously. Totally.
Thank you all so much for coming. You'll be receiving an email from me early next week with a recording of Leah's presentation, her slide deck, and a link to all of the resources she's shared with you. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'll also be leaving a survey in the chat and emailing it to you. Please give us your feedback. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.